As Daniel stepped through the front door, a strange sensation washed over him, a feeling that was at once familiar and yet otherworldly, as though his own home had somehow been transformed while he was away. There was a subtle charge in the air, a tension that made his skin prickle, as if the walls themselves were pulsing with a quiet energy. The usual calm of his house felt different tonight, alive, somehow filled with an essence he couldn't place. Even the lighting seemed softer, casting warm shadows that danced over the furniture. Then he noticed something odd. A faint but exotic scent lingered in the air, something floral yet sharp, like a distant memory from the edges of his consciousness. It was a scent he knew but hadn't expected to encounter here, in his own living room. His heart raced with an inkling of hope, and his hands tingled with the thrill of possibility. Could it really be? Daniel took a slow, cautious step forward, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. His pulse quickened as he turned the corner into the living room, and there, on his sofa, he saw her. Zara, his partner from the stars, was seated comfortably on his couch, her ethereal form framed by the dim glow of the lamp beside her. She was watching him with a serene smile, but her hands were busy with something that made his heart skip a beat. On her lap rested Rex, his beloved, usually stoic German shepherd. But tonight Rex was a picture of pure adoration, lying with his head nestled in Zara's lap, gazing up at her with eyes filled with uncharacteristic warmth and trust. Zara's hand moved in gentle circles over Rex's head, her fingers gliding with a touch that was both tender and reverent, as though she were communing with him on a level beyond words. The sight struck Daniel deeply, filling him with an emotion he couldn't immediately name, a mix of awe, love, and something so profound it felt almost sacred. He paused, his breath caught in his throat as he watched Zara and Rex together. The warmth of her presence filled the room, a magnetic energy that seemed to draw everything toward her, binding them in an invisible web of connection. Rex, who was typically cautious around strangers, had given himself over entirely to her touch. His powerful protective form had softened, his usual alertness replaced by a gentle vulnerability that Daniel had rarely seen. Zara looked up, her gaze meeting his, and her smile widened. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice like music, carrying a resonance that filled his heart. Her voice was soft but charged with an intensity that set every nerve on edge, her presence filling the room with a kind of warmth that had been absent since her departure. "I couldn't stay away. And it seems ... She cast her gaze down at Rex, who huffed contentedly in her lap ... that I'm not the only one who missed you." Daniel took a slow, steady breath, feeling his heart swell at the sight of the two beings he loved most, sharing an understanding that transcended species. He approached them slowly, and Rex turned his head, his gaze soft yet filled with a subtle protectiveness, as if he was somehow aware of the profound bond between his human and this alien being. It was surreal, a collision of his two worlds in the most beautiful way possible. And Daniel couldn't help but feel that his home had suddenly transformed into a sanctuary of warmth and belonging. As he sat down beside Zara, the unusual sensation in the room grew stronger, a kind of pulsing energy that seemed to wrap around them all. He felt enveloped by an invisible aura, a cocoon of love and peace that he had never experienced before. Zara's hand moved to his, her touch as light as a whisper but sending a shock of warmth through his entire body. "I've been with Rex all day," she said softly, a glimmer of humor in her eyes. He was curious at first, cautious. But then he sensed my emotions. "He has an intuition beyond words, Daniel. I felt as if he understood everything I was feeling, even the things I couldn't express." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard as he reached over to ruffle Rex's fur. "He's always had a way of knowing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's seen me at my best and my worst. And I think, maybe he sees in you what I see." Zara's gaze softened, her eyes holding his with a depth that was almost overwhelming. She shifted closer to him, their shoulders touching, her hands still gently caressing Rex. "He's a protector, like you," she murmured. "And he's loyal unconditionally. It's beautiful to see, this bond you share with him. I think in a way, it helped me understand you better." There was a pause, a moment of silence that was somehow fuller than any conversation. Daniel felt the weight of her words settle over him, wrapping him in a feeling of profound connection. Here they were, two beings from worlds galaxies apart, with a loyal creature of Earth bridging the gap between them. It was as if Rex had somehow become the conduit through which their love was shared and deepened, binding them as a family, as something timeless and unbreakable. Zara reached out and placed a hand over his heart, her expression filled with quiet wonder. "You have no idea what it's like for me to be here, in this space with you." And with Rex, she said, her voice a tender whisper. "It's like I've found a part of myself I didn't know was missing." A deep, quiet love filled the room, And Daniel felt as if he were seeing Zira in a new light, not just as his partner but as part of a future that felt destined, as inevitable as the stars. He leaned toward her, resting his forehead against hers, their breath mingling as they sat in silence. Rex shifted slightly, pressing himself closer to Zira, his steady presence grounding them both. In that moment, Daniel understood something he hadn't before. They were no longer simply two beings exploring a romance across the stars. Zira had come into his life as an unexpected miracle, and Rex had become not just a bystander, but a part of their love story, a silent, loyal witness who offered them a kind of acceptance that transcended any words or explanations. Zira broke the silence, her voice a gentle tease. "I think Rex likes me," she whispered, her eyes alight with a warmth that melted Daniel's heart. Daniel chuckled, his fingers tightening around hers. "I think he more than likes you. You're family to him now." She sighed softly, looking down at the dog who had become her quiet companion. "Then I hope I can make both of you feel as loved as you've made me feel today." The warmth in her words was like a balm, and Daniel felt his heart open fully, any lingering doubts dissolving into the atmosphere that now enveloped them. This was love complete, boundless, and filled with the quiet strength of acceptance. He understood now that no distance could sever this connection, no difference could weaken it. He had found a family, one born from loyalty, trust, and the quiet power of true companionship. The next morning, Daniel woke up to the gentle warmth of sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting golden slants across his room. He could feel the remnants of Zira's presence still lingering in the house like an invisible thread connecting them all, binding the air with a peace that felt almost... The next morning, Daniel woke up to the gentle warmth of sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting golden slants across his room. He could feel the remnants of Zira's presence still lingering in the house like an invisible thread connecting them all, binding the air with a peace that felt almost sacred. He'd fallen asleep beside her on the couch, their hands intertwined, and somewhere during the night she'd carefully tucked a blanket around him, leaving him to rest undisturbed. But now, as he stirred, he felt a deep curiosity, a pull to find her again. He rose quietly, stepping softly through the hall until he found himself in the living room, where his heart swelled at the sight before him. There was Zira, seated cross-legged on the floor, her silvery hair shimmering in the morning light. Her posture was relaxed, open, her every movement filled with a gentle, meditative grace. But what captivated him most was her focus on Rex, who lay sprawled on the floor beside her, his head resting on her thigh, his eyes closed in utter contentment. It was a sight so familiar yet so strikingly different, a scene of love and trust that defied any logic or explanation. The connection between them was palpable, something rare and unspoken, a bridge between species that stretched beyond words or gestures. Rex, usually so cautious and watchful, had completely given himself over to her, his body relaxed, his breathing slow and rhythmic, as if he were in the safest place he could imagine. Zira's hand moved in slow, delicate strokes along Rex's back, her fingers tracing patterns that seemed almost ceremonial. Her touch was light yet reverent, as if she were performing an ancient ritual of connection, of mutual understanding. She looked at Rex with a gaze so tender, so filled with love, that Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was as though she could see straight to the heart of the loyal creature before her, a creature who, in turn, had opened himself up to her in ways Daniel had rarely seen. Then, as if sensing his presence, Zira looked up, her eyes meeting his with a quiet, knowing smile. "Good morning, Daniel," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that sent a shiver through him. "Good morning," he replied, unable to take his eyes off her and Rex, both of them bathed in the soft glow of morning. I didn't realize how close you two had become." Zira's hand continued its gentle caresses, her gaze shifting back to Rex with a look of pure affection. "It surprised me too," she admitted, her voice a quiet murmur. "He's an old soul, isn't he? Wise, patient. More than I could have imagined." She let her fingers rest on Rex's shoulder, feeling the strength in his muscles, the steady beat of his heart. "From the moment I arrived, he accepted me. No hesitation, no fear, just understanding. He knows my heart, Daniel, in ways that words could never capture." Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and awe. "He's been with me through everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Through the hardest times, the quietest moments. I always thought of him as my protector, but now, it feels like he's become something more. Like he's protecting both of us somehow." Zira's gaze softened, her hand moving up to stroke Rex's head with a gentleness that was almost otherworldly. "He is a guardian, yes. But more than that, I feel he is a bridge, a living link between you and me, and between the worlds we come from. Through him, I can feel what it means to be human in ways I hadn't understood before." She looked up at Daniel, her eyes glimmering with an intensity that made his heart race. Rex has shown me love that is loyal, unconditional. Through him, I feel connected to this world, to you, in ways that go beyond the limits of what I once knew." The depth of her words resonated within him, filling the room with a profound silence. Daniel took a slow step forward, lowering himself to the floor beside them, feeling the pull of their shared moment like a magnetic force drawing him in. He placed his hand over Zira's, covering both her slender fingers and Rex's thick, warm fur. Together, the three of them sat in a perfect stillness, their breathing synchronizing, their energy mingling into a single pulse that seemed to envelop the room in a cocoon of love and peace. As they sat there, Zira leaned slightly against Daniel, her head resting on his shoulder. "On my world," she whispered, "we don't have creatures like Rex. We have beings of intelligence, yes, but nothing with this kind of warmth. It's as though he can see into my heart, into the places where words can't reach. And he accepts it all without question, without fear." She paused, her voice softening even further. "He has given me something I thought was lost to me, a sense of belonging, of home." Daniel felt his throat tighten, his heart racing with an overwhelming surge of emotion. He looked down at Rex, who opened one eye and gave a contented huff, his head still pressed firmly against Zira's leg. It was as if Rex understood everything they were sharing, as if he could sense the gravity of their connection and the love that bound them all together. "I never realized how much I needed this," Daniel murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "To see you here with him. It makes everything feel complete, like this was always meant to be." Zira turned her face slightly, meeting his gaze with a vulnerability that took his breath away. "Do you think he understands, Daniel? This connection we share, this?" Love, her question was soft, almost tentative, as though she were afraid of the answer. Daniel nodded, smiling as he looked at Rex. "I think he understands more than we'll ever know. He's always had a way of seeing straight to the heart of things, a gift that goes beyond words. In his own way, he knows exactly what's between us. And I think he's given you his trust, just as he's given me his loyalty." Zira's hand continued its slow, rhythmic caresses, and Rex let out a low, contented sigh, his body melting even further into her touch. She closed her eyes, a small, serene smile gracing her lips. "Then he is not just a dog to me, Daniel. He is a companion, a guide. He has shown me how to love without fear, without hesitation. Through him, I understand you better, understand." Thus, the room was silent but alive with a warmth that was almost tangible, a quiet energy that filled every corner. They were bound in a moment that transcended species, backgrounds, and even worlds, a love triangle of sorts, but one woven from loyalty, trust, and the kind of affection that defied definition. It was a family born not of blood but of something deeper, something sacred that reached beyond the known. They remained like that for a long time, held together by the weight of unspoken promises, by the quiet magic that Rex seemed to bring to life. For Daniel, the simple touch of Zira's hand on Rex's fur, the way she cradled his head with a gentleness that bordered on reverence, was a reminder of the love that had transformed his life, that had brought him to a place of peace and belonging he hadn't known was possible. And as the morning light continued to filter in, casting soft beams across the room, Daniel knew that this was his home, a place where an alien and a dog, bound by love, loyalty, and a shared connection, could find a sanctuary. In that stillness, he realized that he was not just sharing his life with Zira, but that she was becoming part of the very fabric of his world, a piece of him as essential as the heartbeat within his chest. In that moment, as they sat together on the floor, Daniel knew that his life had changed forever. Here, surrounded by love and connection that defied explanation, he found his place. They were a family, bound by love, not limited by worlds, and every part of his soul knew that this bond would carry him through any challenge, any distance, any unknown future that lay ahead. The soft click of the front door echoed as Daniel stepped into his dimly lit home, the weight of his week slipping off his shoulders. He'd been away on a last-minute work trip, the longest he'd been apart from Zira since she had arrived on Earth. His mind and heart were consumed by thoughts of her smile, her gentle presence, the way she made his house feel like home. And now, he was back, his chest tight with anticipation, knowing she was somewhere within these walls, waiting for him. As he made his way down the hall, he sensed the air change, a shift in the atmosphere that prickled his skin with electricity. It was as if his home itself had taken a breath, held it, and then exhaled warmth and longing. The hallway opened up into the living room, and there she was, standing quietly by the window, bathed in the gentle glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. Zira turned at the sound of his footsteps, her luminous eyes locking onto his with a depth that sent a rush of warmth through him. She took a tentative step forward, her usual grace softened by something vulnerable, something achingly tender. For a brief moment, they just stared at each other, letting the quiet fill the space between them, as if their souls were reacquainting in the silence. Finally, she moved toward him, her steps unhurried, her gaze never breaking from his. Daniel's heart pounded, the world narrowing to just this one moment, this single reunion. When she reached him, she raised a hand, hesitating only a fraction of a second before touching his face, her fingers light against his cheek, as if reacquainting herself with his features. "You're here," she murmured, her voice filled with an emotion that made his chest ache. Her fingers moved slowly, tracing the contours of his face, and Daniel felt himself lean into her touch, his eyes closing for just a moment, savoring the warmth of her hand. "I'm here," he whispered back, his voice thick. His hands rose to cover hers, holding it against his cheek as he opened his eyes to look at her, taking in every delicate feature, every faint glow that made her so beautifully different yet so wholly his. Without another word, he pulled her into his arms, feeling her body relax against his, fitting perfectly as if she had been waiting for this embrace her entire life. Her arms wrapped around him, her fingers threading through the fabric of his shirt, as if she feared he might slip away again. The warmth of her breath brushed against his neck, her presence filling the empty spaces within him that had longed for her since the moment he'd stepped away. They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in a cocoon of silence and warmth, letting the shared longing dissipate in each other's arms. There were no words, no explanations, just the quiet, fierce affirmation of love that pulsed between them. Zira's fingers pressed softly against his back, each touch carrying a meaning, a reassurance that he was truly here, with her, and she would never let him go. Daniel pulled back slightly to look into her eyes, his hand moving to cup her face, his thumb gently tracing the edge of her cheekbone. He could see the softness in her gaze, a glimmer of vulnerability that she rarely showed, and it made him feel as though he were glimpsing something sacred, something fragile and precious. "Did you miss me?" he asked, his voice a whisper, a hint of teasing lightening the intensity of the moment. Her lips curved into a small smile, and she tilted her head, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "More than words can say," she replied softly, her voice barely audible, but her eyes told him everything. She had missed him with an intensity that defied language, a depth of emotion that he felt in every inch of his own being. Slowly, Zira reached up, her fingers finding their way through his hair, her touch both tender and possessive, as if she were grounding herself in this moment, in him. "While you were away, I felt." Adrift, she murmured, her eyes searching his, vulnerability shimmering there. "The days felt longer, the nights emptier. Your presence, it fills something within me that I didn't even realize was hollow." Daniel's heart swelled with a fierce protectiveness, a love so powerful it was almost overwhelming. He moved his hand to her neck, his thumb grazing the soft curve of her jaw as he drew her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that held all the unspoken promises of his heart. It was a gentle kiss, deep and unhurried, a reconnection that went beyond words, beyond time and space. Their breaths mingled, their hands exploring, relearning each other's shapes, textures, and warmth, as though imprinting every sensation onto their souls. Zira's fingers trailed down his shoulders, her touch feather-light yet charged with an intensity that made his skin tingle. Every caress, every gentle press of her fingers spoke of longing, of need, of a love that was both boundless and grounding. After a moment, they broke the kiss, their foreheads resting together as they caught their breaths, eyes closed, reveling in the closeness. Zira lifted her hand to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, as though assuring herself that he was really here, really hers. "You're my home, Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "It doesn't matter where I am, as long as I have you." Her words were a confession, a pledge, carrying a depth of feeling that went beyond the physical. He knew, in that moment, that this was love in its truest form, a love that transcended distance, time, and even species, a love that was as infinite as the stars. Daniel took her hand, bringing it to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her fingertips, feeling her shiver under his touch. "Then you'll never be without me," he murmured, his voice filled with conviction. "Because I'm not going anywhere, Zira. This, what we have, it's everything to me." They stood there, entwined in each other's arms, the room filled with the warmth of their love. The silence was profound, a shared understanding that required no words, no explanations. It was a silence that held the weight of their reunion, the gravity of their connection, and the quiet promise of a future bound together. Daniel gently pulled her down onto the couch, wrapping his arms around her as she nestled into his side, her head resting on his shoulder, her fingers tracing gentle patterns on his chest. He could feel her heartbeat, steady and calm, aligning with his own, and in that moment he felt complete, as if every part of his being was finally whole. Zira's hand moved up to his cheek, her thumb brushing lightly over his skin. She gazed at him with a look so full of love, so filled with tenderness, that it took his breath away. "You've shown me a world I never knew could exist," she murmured, her voice like a soft melody. "You've taught me what it means to belong, to be loved in a way that goes beyond words. And I can't imagine my life without you." Daniel leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, feeling his own heart open to her, completely vulnerable yet strong, filled with a love that was both quiet and fierce. "Then stay with me, Zira. Let's build this life together. Whatever comes, we'll face it side by side." Her fingers tightened slightly on his shirt, her eyes shining with unshed tears, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper, but her words carrying a depth that echoed through the room. "Always, Daniel. I am yours, in all ways that matter." They held each other close as the first light of dawn crept into the room, the world around them fading, leaving only the warmth of their shared embrace, the quiet strength of their love, and the promise of a future filled with boundless possibility. They had found home in each other, a home built on trust, acceptance, and a love that would endure, as infinite and unbreakable as the stars themselves. In the quiet of their living room, a gentle harmony settled over Daniel, Zira, and Rex, a bond that transcended the usual dynamics of love and loyalty, creating something deeper, something rare. It was as if an invisible thread connected the three of them, weaving their hearts together into a single, resonant beat that pulsed with warmth and trust. They were each so different, man, alien and dog, and yet, as they shared the same space, an understanding blossomed among them, unspoken yet profoundly real. Daniel sat on the couch, Zira nestled close beside him, her hand resting lightly on his thigh, a small but grounding touch. Rex lay stretched out at their feet, his great head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but always aware, as if he were their silent guardian, watching over this moment of connection with an almost sacred reverence. Daniel's hand found its way to Zira's, fingers lacing together naturally, while his other hand reached down to gently ruffle Rex's thick fur, feeling the comforting warmth beneath his fingers. The three of them, together like this, felt like the culmination of something destined, something larger than themselves. Zira's gaze was soft as she looked at Rex, her alien eyes reflecting a depth of affection and curiosity that made Daniel's heart clench. She had come to understand Rex in a way that went beyond language, beyond even body language. It was a communication that lived in silence, in shared glances, in the exchange of energy between two beings who had accepted each other wholeheartedly. Rex, always perceptive, lifted his head slightly, meeting Zira's gaze. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no wariness. He watched her with the same unwavering loyalty and openness that he reserved for Daniel, a testament to the trust he had placed in her since she'd first entered their lives. In that moment, Daniel understood something profound. Rex didn't just see Zira as an extension of Daniel's life, he saw her as part of their family, as much as she was Daniel's. Daniel marveled at the beauty of it, feeling a deep, quiet awe. Rex had always been his steadfast companion, his loyal protector through the toughest times. But with Zira, he had become something more, a bridge between worlds, uniting their hearts in a way neither Daniel nor Zira could have achieved alone. It was as though Rex sensed the depth of their connection and, in his own silent way, blessed it, wrapping them in a love that was unconditional, solid, and true. Zira shifted slightly, her hand slipping from Daniel's to reach down, softly stroking Rex's head. The touch was gentle, reverent, as though she understood the magnitude of this creature's loyalty, as if she could feel the history and memories embedded in each strand of fur beneath her fingertips. Her fingers moved slowly, tracing the lines of Rex's jaw, her expression filled with an emotion Daniel hadn't often seen on her face, a tenderness that went beyond her usual quiet affection. "He's more than a companion to you," she murmured, her voice filled with understanding. "Rex is. He's part of your heart, part of the foundation of who you are. I can feel it. This unity, this love that goes beyond what I've ever known." Daniel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "He's seen me through everything, Zira. He's been there on my darkest days, the times when I couldn't see a way forward. Rex, he gave me hope when I thought I'd lost it." Zira's gaze softened, her eyes glistening as she looked between Daniel and Rex, the weight of his words settling over her like a revelation. "Then he has shared your burdens, held your secrets," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as though she were speaking to the very heart of who Rex was. "I think he understands that now I'm here to share them too. That I am yours and by extension his." Daniel's heart swelled, the love he felt for her growing in that moment, expanding to include the creature at their feet who had been his constant. He knew now that their bond was more than just romantic, it was familial, an unbreakable connection that wrapped itself around all three of them, fusing their lives into a singular entity. Zero wasn't just his partner, she was Rex's too, and together, they formed a circle of trust and love that filled him with a peace he hadn't known he needed. As if sensing the profound shift, Rex lifted his head and nuzzled Zira's hand, a quiet acceptance that felt almost ceremonial. She smiled, her hand moving gently down his head, her fingers tracing a line down his back. Rex huffed contentedly, a deep sound of satisfaction that echoed softly in the room, his eyes closing in what seemed like gratitude, as if he too understood the sacredness of this shared love. The evening wore on, but time seemed irrelevant. They sat together, wrapped in the warmth of their bond, no words necessary, just the quiet, pulsing love that flowed between them. Daniel felt himself relax into the stillness, a calm settling over him that went beyond mere contentment. He had found his home, his heart, in the presence of these two beings, both so different yet united in a way that felt eternal. Zira leaned her head on his shoulder, her breathing soft and steady, mirroring his own rhythm. Rex, too, lay curled at their feet, his presence a silent testament to the loyalty and love that had bound them all together. For Daniel, this was a moment of profound peace, a moment where he realized that he was no longer alone, that his heart was filled and held by not one, but two beings who understood him, who accepted him, who would stand by him through anything. In that tender, hushed space, Daniel allowed himself to imagine the future. He saw days filled with laughter, quiet mornings like this, and the reassuring presence of Zira and Rex by his side, grounding him, giving him purpose. He understood now that love was not always loud or extravagant sometimes. It was quiet, as simple as sharing a room in comfortable silence, as powerful as the feeling of a warm hand in his, or the gentle weight of a loyal companion at his feet. As they sat together, breathing in sync, hearts aligned, Daniel knew that he would carry this moment with him forever. It was a bond he couldn't fully explain, but one that he felt deep in his soul, a connection that transcended words, that existed in the space between breaths, between heartbeats. This was his family, his sanctuary, his forever. Finally, as the night deepened and shadows softened, Daniel shifted, pressing a kiss to Zira's forehead. She looked up at him, her eyes warm and filled with the same quiet devotion he felt. Rex, sensing the tenderness in the room, lifted his head, his eyes reflecting a contentment that mirrored their own. "We're together," Daniel whispered, the words simple yet carrying the weight of a promise, a vow that he knew would hold strong through all things. Zira nodded, her hand moving to clasp his, fingers entwining. "Yes," she murmured, her voice like a soft echo in the silence. "Always." With a final glance, they settled back, letting the stillness embrace them, letting the strength of their bond carry them into the night. In the gentle pulse of that shared love, they drifted together, three hearts united, three souls intertwined, creating a sanctuary of love that would remain unbroken, eternal. The morning light crept softly into the room, casting a warm glow across the space where Daniel, Zira, and Rex lay together, wrapped in the gentle silence that only dawn could bring. As Daniel opened his eyes, he found Zira still curled up against him, her face softened in peaceful slumber. For a moment, he just watched her, feeling an overwhelming tenderness wash over him. Every part of him felt grounded, complete, as if he were held in place not just by her presence but by something timeless, something that felt as natural as breathing. Rex stirred at their feet, his large head lifting slightly as he looked up at them with eyes that held a quiet wisdom. Daniel felt his heart swell, knowing that these two souls were now part of him in a way that went beyond love or loyalty. They had become his home, his family, and the thought of a future with them filled him with a warmth that erased any shadow of doubt or fear. As if sensing his gaze, Zira slowly opened her eyes, her lips curving into a soft smile as she met his. In that silent moment, an understanding passed between them, one that didn't need words, one that spoke of promises, of commitments that transcended time or space. She reached up, her hand finding his, fingers lacing together as they shared the simple joy of being beside one another. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice hushed, carrying the gentleness of the dawn. "Good morning," he replied, his voice barely more than a breath, reverent, as if anything louder might break the sacredness of this moment. Zira's gaze softened, her fingers tracing small, thoughtful circles on his hand. "Last night while you were sleeping," she began, her voice carrying an intimate intensity, "I watched you, and I thought about us, about what we've built here. It feels like I finally found the place I'm meant to be, the person I'm meant to share my life with." Daniel felt a rush of emotions fill him, the sheer power of her words wrapping around his heart, making it beat faster. He had always hoped, deep down, that this connection would become something lasting, but hearing her say it, hearing the commitment in her voice, made it real in a way that was almost breathtaking. "Zira," he started, his voice catching slightly. "I feel the same. I can't imagine my life without you." being with you. It's like every piece of my soul has finally found where it belongs." He hesitated, his heart pounding as he searched her face, gathering the courage to voice what had been building inside him. "I want us to build a future together. Whatever that means, whatever challenges we face, I want us to face them as one." Her face softened, and she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, their breaths mingling, a shared warmth that held all the words they couldn't say. She nodded, her hand tightening in his, grounding them both. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with a fierce determination. "A future, together. I want that too." Rex, sensing the gravity of the moment, shifted closer, his great head resting on their joined hands, as if to seal their unspoken vows. Daniel smiled, reaching down to scratch behind Rex's ears, grateful for the loyal presence of his steadfast companion. He knew, in that moment, that Rex was a part of this promise too, that their lives, intertwined as they were, included every part of this love, this family they had formed. Zira looked at Rex with a gentle fondness, then back at Daniel, her eyes shining. "We're a family now, aren't we?" she asked softly, the words carrying a vulnerability that touched something deep within him. "Yes," he replied, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "We are. And nothing, no distance, no difference will ever change that." They lay in comfortable silence, letting the promise of their future settle between them, a vow that didn't need grand gestures or elaborate words. It was a commitment spoken in the gentle way she held his hand, in the warmth of Rex's presence, in the shared understanding that their lives had become something whole, something sacred. After a while, Zira turned her gaze to the window, where the first rays of sunlight bathed the room in a soft, golden light. "What do you see, Daniel?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "When you look at the future, what do you see for us?" He paused, looking down at her, considering the question with a reverence that made his chest tighten. "I see a life filled with quiet mornings like this," he said, his voice a whisper. "I see us building a home together, a place where we can feel safe, where we can grow together, where we can belong. I see Rex by our side, watching over us. I see laughter, joy, and a peace that I never thought I'd find." She listened, her expression softening with each word, her eyes filled with a quiet joy that reflected his own. She leaned into him, her voice a soft murmur. "Then that's the future I want too, Daniel. A life that is steady, strong, filled with love and loyalty. A life with you and Rex by my side." They sat in stillness, their shared visions settling around them, binding them together in a way that felt eternal. Zira tilted her head up, her gaze meeting his, and in that moment, Daniel could see the depth of her love, the quiet intensity of her commitment. It was a look that spoke of a life shared, of promises made without reservation. "Whatever comes, Zira," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion, "I'll be here. For you. For us. No matter the challenges, no matter how difficult things get, I'll be by your side." She nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "And I, Daniel, will be here for you. Always." Rex let out a soft huff, as if to confirm the bond they were forming, his dark eyes gazing up at them with a contentment that spoke of understanding. Daniel and Zira looked down at him, their hands still entwined, their hearts woven together with his in a way that felt ancient, undeniable. As the morning sunlight poured into the room, Daniel leaned forward, brushing a gentle kiss against Zira's forehead, sealing their promise, their future. In that small, tender gesture, he felt their lives intertwine, solidify into something unbreakable. They were not just two people from different worlds, they were two souls bound by a love that defied boundaries, by a loyalty that would carry them forward, no matter where the path led. And so they sat, the three of them, a man, an alien, and a loyal dog, bound by a shared promise, a quiet yet profound commitment to face the future together. There was no fanfare, no grand declarations, just the steady beat of their hearts, the gentle weight of their shared love, and the unspoken vow that would carry them through all things. They had found each other across worlds, and now, with each promise they made, each quiet look shared, they were building a future together, a future as boundless and resilient as the love that had brought them to this moment. As the evening deepened and shadows softened into a quiet embrace, Daniel, Zira, and Rex found themselves gathered in the living room, bathed in the gentle, flickering glow of a fire. The night was hushed, filled with a profound stillness that wrapped around them like a soft, protective blanket, as though even the universe were standing watch over this moment of unity. Daniel sat on the couch, Zira nestled close at his side, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing steady and calm. Her hand lay on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heart, her touch warm and grounding. Beside them, Rex lay sprawled across the floor, his presence a reassuring weight, a silent guardian that completed the circle of love and trust binding them all. The glow from the fire cast a golden light over them, softening their features, merging them in the gentle intimacy of shared silence. They didn't need to speak every look. Every gentle squeeze of the hand, every shared glance conveyed more than words ever could. They had found their peace, a sanctuary within each other, a space where time seemed to slow, allowing them to savor each precious second of togetherness. The house, once a mere structure, had transformed into a home, infused with the warmth and belonging they'd built together. Zira lifted her head, looking up at Daniel with a gaze that held the quiet intensity of 1,000 promises. Her eyes reflected the firelight, but there was a softness in them, a depth of love that took his breath away. She reached up, brushing her fingers along his jaw, tracing a path that was both tender and filled with a silent reverence. He closed his eyes at her touch, feeling the weight of her love settle over him, grounding him in a way that felt eternal, boundless. In this stillness, Daniel could feel the significance of every moment that had led them here, every choice, every risk, every unspoken fear that they had overcome together. It was as if the pieces of his life had finally fallen into place, aligning into a pattern that felt not only whole but radiant. With Zira by his side and Rex at their feet, he felt complete, his soul woven into a tapestry of love, loyalty, and purpose. Zira's voice broke the silence, her words a soft murmur. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered, her voice carrying a fragile vulnerability that made his heart clench. "For bringing me into your life, for showing me that love can be this simple, this pure." Daniel opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with a smile that held all the love he felt for her. A love so deep it felt as if it had always been a part of him. "No, Zira," he replied, his voice low and filled with emotion. "Thank you for showing me what it means to truly belong, to be seen and loved in a way I never thought was possible. You've made this house a home." Her smile softened, and she leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips, a silent affirmation of the life they were building together. In that kiss, he felt every promise, every vow they had made, a warmth that filled him from within, anchoring him to this moment, to this love that transcended any boundary, any fear. Rex let out a contented sigh, his large body stretching slightly as if to remind them of his presence, his quiet loyalty ever present, ever constant. Daniel chuckled softly, reaching down to rest his hand on Rex's back, feeling the familiar rise and fall of his breathing, a rhythm that had been a constant comfort in his life. Rex's head shifted, pressing gently into Daniel's hand, his dark eyes reflecting a trust and contentment that made Daniel's heart swell with gratitude. Looking down at Rex, Daniel felt a wave of appreciation for the bond they shared, a bond that had brought him through his darkest times, that had guided him to Zira, that had helped him find the courage to open his heart again. And now Rex was not only his loyal companion but a part of the love he shared with Zira, a piece of their shared story that made it whole. Zira's hand moved to rest on Rex as well, her fingers gliding through his fur with the same tenderness she showed Daniel. It was a gesture of acceptance, of love, a silent acknowledgement of the role Rex played in their lives, the guardian who had woven their hearts together with his quiet devotion. Rex's eyes closed, his body relaxing further, as though he, too, understood that they were his family, bound not by blood but by something deeper, something that would endure beyond time and space. They settled back into the silence, a quiet that felt more profound, more filled with meaning than any conversation. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside they were cocooned in warmth, wrapped in the assurance of a love that had become their anchor, their home. It was a love that went beyond attraction, beyond companionship, a love that was steady, unwavering, built on trust and understanding, on the quiet joy of simply being together. Daniel looked around, his gaze drifting from Zira to Rex and then to the familiar walls of their home, each corner now infused with memories, with laughter, with a peace he hadn't known he needed. This was his sanctuary, his life, and he knew, deep down, that he had found everything he had ever wanted, everything he had ever needed, right here. Zira shifted closer, her head resting against his chest, her hands slipping into his. He held her close, his arms wrapping around her protectively, and they sat like that, entwined, hearts beating in sync, souls bound in a way that felt ancient, timeless. Rex remained at their feet, his breathing a soft, steady hum that blended seamlessly into the quiet of the night. For Daniel, this was more than just a moment, it was a culmination, a fulfillment of every hope he had ever carried. With Zira and Rex by his side, he had found not just love but a belonging that filled him to his core. They were his family, his home, a future that held more beauty and joy than he had ever dared to dream. As the fire crackled softly, casting warm shadows around them, Daniel closed his eyes, letting the warmth of Zira's body, the familiar comfort of Rex's presence, and the peace of this home settle over him like a blanket. Here he was safe. Here he was loved. And here, in this quiet sanctuary, he knew he had found the kind of forever that defied words, a love that would carry him through all things, unbreakable and eternal. In the final, whispered breaths of the night, Daniel's heart beat steady and calm, held in the hands of a love that was boundless, a serenity that felt like destiny fulfilled.